In the conclusion of our coverage of the Skinwalker Ranch, we discuss the findings of the scientific exploration of phenomena by the team of PhD scientists, which are a far cry from the coldly detached deductions you might expect, along with further tales of horrifying experiences they had while occupying the ranch, and dive into a multitude of theories to try and make some sense of what goes on there. The implications of their research are mind-blowing, horrifying, and very likely go beyond what your mind dares to imagine. Is this ranch an anomaly, or do the occurrences that transpire there correlate to paranormal events that have taken place all over the world for as long as we've been here? You're listening to Creep It Real, and today we conclude our coverage of the Skinwalker Ranch.
Creep It Real is a weekly podcast where we present our theories of the subjects we cover based on our interest and research. Some material may be graphic and disturbing, so proceed with caution.
Hey everybody, it's me, Ashley,
and Shy.
Yes, and we're here back with part 3 of Skinwalker Ranch. It's the last day of Skinwalkers for us, and I'm not going to be sad because I'm walking around shaking in my boots all the time. So I'd like to just move on to a separate scary topic.
We've both definitely been more jumpy than usual. Ashley, you got scared of a horse earlier today.
I did. And also in the middle of the night, whenever I had to go let the dog out, and he was out there, and I just hear all these like little yelps. I'm hearing these weird dog yelps at like 2 a.m, and I'm like, what's getting those dogs? Like everything is getting me freaked out. Oh, I was going to text you last night because I also saw a firefly, and for like a split second, right whenever I saw it, I was like, oh my God. I literally got chills when I saw it, and then I was like, oh, it's a firefly. I've seen them a million times.
It's like the tiniest alien spaceship ever. It's just...
I didn't know how big it was at first. All I saw was really bright light, and I was like, oh no. Anyway, okay. So we talked last week about a lot of accounts that the Shermans had at the ranch. People that were their neighbors also experienced similar activity, and then in the surrounding area, some of the other activity that had gone on with witnesses who... You know, for most of those, they were multiple witnesses saw the same thing, and the police themselves thought they were credible. So this can't just be chalked up to a bunch of crazies at this point, it seems. So now we're going to get into the private investigative organization, which we've spoken about a little bit, the NIDS group, National Institute for Science and Discovery.
The NIDS we're speaking about investigate like paranormal being, and paranormal doesn't necessarily mean ghosts and all that stuff too, and haunting. Para is unusual.
Yeah, this was a group of PhD scientists and defense intelligence coordinated to study the paranormal events that happened on the ranch and in the area. And one of their objectives was to determine if the phenomena that was at the ranch posed a national defense threat, which is understandable because what the heck's going on there? And if we can't explain it, right, and there's all this bizarre stuff where portals seemingly are opening in the sky and things are coming through them, I'm sure that the government and the Department of Defense would like to know what's going on and be able to get a handle on it. So
I'll be honest, I'm really surprised that they didn't move in and make these people evacuate the area and just completely take over for investigation. You know, it's kind of strange because with like Area 51, nobody lives there. Yeah. It's just a study area, really, and whatever experiments they do there.
Well, I don't know if it's because the ranch has been privately owned for a long time, or if it's because there's more to the story than we currently know, but also we'll discuss in a little bit. So that may explain why that would be the case, if that is the case. Why they didn't just take ownership. I mean, I don't know if you can really just take ownership. I'm sure they can. I don't really know the laws regarding that. But regardless, in November and December of 1996, a dramatic change took place at the ranch where whatever it was that was causing all of this various activity, that invisible hunter was becoming the hunted, because they were there to study and confront the phenomenon with a scientific team whose primary motivation was not fear, but curiosity. According to them, they felt like this thing was no longer in charge. And one side of the researchers wanted to cover every square inch of the ranch with instrumentation and sensors to track every minute change, while the other side felt like a less is more approach would be more effective. And Terry was in the camp that he felt the less intrusive that the scientific team took as their approach, the better it would be and the more results that it would yield, because he always felt like whatever it was, if he knew it was there, it didn't want to be seen, but it was more like when it was unsuspected, that's when most activity came about. So he didn't think it would be a great idea to add cameras everywhere and sensors and wire the place up, but as it stands, the NIDS team was a scientific research team, so they had to conduct experiments and try to get the situation to be as much of a controlled environment as possible. So it's kind of hard to do that, to get scientific evidence without getting to that point where you have to kind of be invasive. Terry had said to them at the offset of this investigation that the phenomenon needed to be hunted like a very smart, large game animal, because it seemed to be able to predict what was going on.
Well, the thing about that is if you've ever hunted before, those animals could watch you from one single spot and you would never know it. They can be so silent and still, you could walk right past them and basically step on them and you wouldn't know.
Right, and that kind of seems to be the case once we get a little bit further into this, honestly. So after months and months of them getting absolutely zero experiences, observations, there was nothing going on September 16th, 1996, at 1:30 a.m., the NIDS team had their first sighting where somebody saw a bright light in the distance over a cotton field. They initially thought that it was a flare because it was so bright, but it hovered above the tree line and then dipped down, then back up again. And they said it was unlike any aircraft, helicopter, flare, star, or planet they'd ever heard of or seen, and so it became an unidentified object. That also kind of correlates to some of the stuff that you saw, just the way it moved, how it kind of would dip down and then zip back up and move real.
Well, we were... for a second, we almost thought maybe it could be a gas balloon.
Yeah.
But it was moving so quickly, I don't think that they have the ability to do it like that.
Yeah. As far as we know. You know, we say all of this with the, one small reservation that we may just not know, what the government or somebody has technology to be able to do. But, as far as we know, we don't know any aircraft or anything like that would be able to do that. Several photos were taken of this light, but it didn't show anything but just a bright kind of speck in the sky. It caused them to kind of have a resurgence of nighttime effort, and they doubled up the teams that would research at night, and they felt like they were ready for anything. Through October and November of 96, NIDS came week after week to the ranch for observation and to interview locals about their experiences. The Ute Indians told of many similar experiences that the Shermans had at the ranch, and at the offset, the non-Native Americans were more reserved with their talking to these researchers, but after a few weeks, they began to tell similar stories that correlated to the experiences at the ranch and the ones that the Ute Indians told them as well. They assembled a library of extensive videotape interviews with over dozens of locals sharing their experiences. We talked about that neighbor of theirs last episode, that the cow seemed to have been dropped from a distance and killed. Well, I was wrong. So what happened was this neighboring rancher, he went outside, he saw one of his female cows was standing or kind of awkwardly standing in the middle of this pasture, and when he went out to investigate, he noticed that her 2 front legs were broken. And he was obviously kind of confused. He didn't know what was going on, but he went inside because he thought he probably was going to have to put her down. He went inside to get his jacket and his rifle, and like just minutes later came back outside and she was completely gone. And he said, it's a flat pasture. There's no large boulders. There's no trees. There's nothing that she could have hidden behind. It was literally minutes. And
well, even if there was, a cow with one broken leg
right.
Yeah, isn't going to move too fast at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah, other aspect of that I didn't think about. So he couldn't find her anywhere. He didn't know what happened. He went inside, obviously extremely distraught and confused by what was going on. A couple hours later in the afternoon, he looked outside, and in that same exact spot, there was the cow again, but she was laying down, and when he went out to look at her, all 4 of her legs were now broken. So earlier it had only been 2, then she disappeared, and now she's back, and all 4 legs are broken. So he had to put her out of her misery, obviously, and he literally had no idea what could have happened to her except that something took her and dropped her, initially breaking 2 of her legs, and then again took her and dropped her, breaking the other 4. The veterinarians came and concluded pretty much the same thing. There was really no other conclusion that they could draw from what had happened.
Well, just growing up around cows, like I've mentioned before, I mean, it wouldn't be anything if one broke one leg because they get into things. They might have fallen in the ditch or whatnot. But for a cow to break 4 legs, I don't really see how that would happen unless, yes, they were dropped from a great distance.
Or like something came and hit them with
did it on purpose, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're sturdy creatures.
Right. I mean, I wonder how much it would take to
break a cow's leg,
come in and like hit a cow's legs till they broke.
If you could catch it, honestly.
Yeah, right. And then would it be just silently standing
No.
there? You know, would it not have made a big racket? Because he went outside not because he heard anything, but because he just saw her standing in an awkward way initially. He told of a sombrero-shaped object that was flying and hovering around the ridge near his house, about 100 yards from their house. And that was around the same time as this cow her legs had been broken.
These Mexican aliens.
One night, his wife saw a silvery object that was flying incredibly fast, descending towards the ground. She was literally like bracing herself to feel the impact of this when it hit the ground. And instead, what happened was it flew directly into the ridge as though the ridge wasn't even there.
So, possible portal?
Portal, or is it even... I mean, gosh. I feel like...
What if...
Totally crazy. I'm like, what if it's not even a fully... physical object?
Yeah, like maybe a possible hologram even to distract.
Maybe.
Who knows?
I mean, there's so many possibilities. So, and then, the experiences at the ranch really did not, it wasn't like this constant thing as it was whenever the Shermans lived there. Months went by again, and then in January, Terry called and explained that he had moved he had kept cattle at the ranch because he was managing it, and I don't know. I really was like, why? He couldn't let it go and I don't know. He just couldn't. So, I don't even know if these were his calves or not. Now I'm saying that and I'm not sure. But regardless, Terry had called and explained that freezing temperatures had caused him to move the cattle to an indoor corral where they were staying all the time and they were eating there. That's where they were. It was like literally, I think 30 something below zero, and they couldn't survive out there. So one morning he came in to discover that a few of the calves had been mutilated. Their ears were chopped up, and some had puncture wounds to their eyelids. When a veteran, I know, and this is indoors, it was 30 below zero. So when the vet arrived, he said that it was unlike anything he'd ever seen before, and it was unlikely that a predator would attack inside a corral in temperatures that were 30 below zero, which Terry also agreed with. There was another vet there that brushed them off and said that this was definitely like a coyote attack. I just don't know how you can make that judgment. But also they said that there were a lot of veterinarians that didn't want to have anything to do with anything related to cattle mutilations or injuries like that because they felt like it would draw the cattle ranchers away from the area, thus hurting their business, I suppose. So but there were always some that were willing to, and I don't want to say they were only seeking out veterinarians that were going to concur with like their crazy hypotheses, but still, you know, you can understand that like there's just probably going to be some that are not going to consider things that seem a little bit out of the ordinary.
Well, then your name's attached to that, and
Right.
what if it is a big hoax, and then you have to go back and say, no, I swear I didn't have anything to do with it. So
That's true, yeah.
Understandable.
Right. In late February, Terry moved the cattle back onto the ranch, and that's when that calf that was dismembered brutally that we talked about last episode, where its legs were spread and every internal organ, muscle, etc. had been removed. That's when that happened, was when he brought the cattle back onto the ranch then. It was around this time that Terry's blue heelers, which were typically aggressive as heck, were hiding in their kennels. They wouldn't come out for food or water, and they would stay inside their kennels whimpering, and this went on for weeks. They wouldn't come out for anything. So one ran off, never to be seen again, and we know the story that happened to the rest of the three, where they were all killed, unfortunately. So just a little bit of info about what was going on then. One night, Kelleher and Terry had been driving around with a large, powerful spotlight to check on the cattle, which it was this, like, I think it was like a military-grade spotlight. It said it illuminated everything in the area. And they saw, in which Terry did this frequently because he needed to check on the cows because there was something out there getting them. They saw one that seemed to be distressed by a tree line, and when they threw the spotlight on it, they saw the reflection of two giant yellow orbs 20 feet up in a tree, realizing it belonged to a giant black creature. So these were the eyes of some yellow-eyed giant thing that was up in a tree. And both of them saw it. They were no more than 50 yards away, and Terry grabbed his rifle and took aim at the creature and shot it with precision. We know he's a pretty spot-on target. Or what's the word?
Marksman,
geez Louise. So the minute that the shot rang out, the yellow eyes in the tree disappeared. Terry said he got him, and he saw the thing fall to the ground. They hurriedly drove over to the tree, stopping 40 feet from it. They scanned the darkness for the creature, and Terry suddenly yelled, "I see him! I've got him at point blank." As they jumped over the fence excitedly, they realized there was nothing on the ground anywhere in sight. No animal, no blood, nothing. So they began to quarter the area and came upon a single print. It was a large oval with two claws that extended from the back that dug a few inches deeper into the ground. What the heck is that? I'm like, I don't know what that would be. The print looked like a bird of prey, perhaps a raptor, but it was huge, and judging by the depth of the print, it was extremely heavy. They searched and searched for the companion print or any sign of the wounded creature, but could find nothing but one more single print in an area of unmelted snow about 20 feet from the first one, but that was it. The next day they compared notes, and Terry told Kelleher that he swore there were two large animals. There was one in the tree, and another large dog-like creature was on the ground below it. He shot the creature in the tree with his first shot, and the dog-like animal on the ground was shot twice after they began their foot search. He was an expert marksman and from much further distances, but didn't seem to make a mark on either of these two creatures. Terry described the creature on the ground as heavily muscled, enormous, and about a 400-pound dog. What is that?
So that would kind of coincide with the very first episode when we were talking about the large wolf creature.
Yeah.
Again, another dog creature.
Right, a dog creature with that was the companion to some giant thing up in a tree that maybe like now we've got like an enormous bajillion pound bird or something. Like, what in the heck is going on here? Up to this point, the instances were difficult to explain, and other than verifying unusual anomalous activity, they weren't sure if it fit the criteria that NIDS was looking for as far as any sort of scientific deductions were concerned. It's all just, firsthand accounts, nothing they could actually gather any data from. There was no like fur, feathers, blood, there was just nothing but this one bizarre print in the ground. And then just, other personal accounts. So, and all the pictures they would take never yielded anything. It was just bizarre. So they were at meetings with their scientific advisory board, which is also another part of this NIDS team. It wasn't just the researchers in the field. It was this PhD, hand-picked scientific advisory board, which I did mention, I think, last episode. That board made it clear that these experiences, in the absence of physical evidence, did not constitute verification of anything. So, like I said, they're pretty much like, you guys aren't doing jack shit up there. Like, what are you just like taking hallucinogenic mushrooms and pretending like you see this crazy stuff going on? Like, what's going on?
That was one big thing I actually read, was that they scoured the area for like hallucinogenic plants or mushrooms and whatnot, whatever. Yeah. And they couldn't find any. So
yeah, that is definitely, we'll talk about it in the theories, but, a lot of these theories that we'll talk about, there's not a lot to stand behind them. After the mutilated calf that we talked about last episode and the predators in the woods that we just mentioned, the activity seemed to die down until April, and that's when Terry said that he began to have an uneasy feeling of dread at the ranch. And he said that this is something that he felt preceded the phenomenon always, that he would start to feel just this horribly uneasy feeling of dread that just consumed him. So he told them this, and then the next day, he called to inform NIDS that he'd unexplainably lost another calf. It was the 5th animal to disappear since the beginning of the year, which had only been 4 months. And, this is like completely disappearing off the face of the earth with no sign of tracks of anything that could have taken them. Its tracks weren't there. It's just, it happened to one of the long-standing ranch dogs. It's just, what is happening to these animals that are missing? So Kelleher stated that the minute he set foot on the property, he could feel in the atmosphere a thick, creepy miasma, which I had to look up, and I thought it was just I like that word. So it's an oppressive or unpleasant atmosphere that surrounds or emanates from something. So I think we've all probably felt some sort of that feeling before, be it from something physical that we can see or not. I feel it right now.
You feel it right now.
Just
like,
probably because I'm
month.
probably just because I'm in my head. So a few days later is when that situation happened where all 4 of those 1,000-pound bulls of theirs ended up being put in the trailer, the tool trailer. And when I was reading a little bit more detailed account of it from Terry, he was saying that when he first saw them, that they almost seemed to not even be awake. They were just like asleep, and he banged on the wall because he was like, are they dying? What's going on? And they kind of snapped out of it, and once they did, they pretty much destroyed that whole trailer. They kicked the wall and completely destroyed it.
Well, if you were going to move 4 ginormous animals, you would have to sedate them, hypnotize, you know what I mean? They would have to be under some sort of influence to calmly be stuck into this tiny area, because they're not going to want to go.
No, and they're going to be fighting, once they're in there, they're going to be panicking. It's not like they're going to just be like, oh, it's so relaxing in here. They're going to be freaking out like they did when he banged on the wall. So a few days later, after that bull incident, Terry was watching as one of his cows was casually walking towards a bright blue salt lick that was between 2 lines of trees when it suddenly stopped dead in its tracks, its head lowered, and it began to back away from the salt lick. The cow was backing away from something that they could not... Gwen was also with him, and so she could not see anything either. It was backing away from something that they could not see as fast as its legs would move. It was just backing away like crazy, which I was like, I've never seen a cow back away from something really fast, but I also haven't been around probably cattle as much as you have. So I don't know if that's a normal activity, but he did...
I think it depends. I mean, if they were faced with like a predator, definitely, which this is what it sounds like it is.
Yeah.
And cows can move, honestly, when they want to.
Yeah.
So
Terry reached for his compass because he had learned that the activity would sometimes make his compass go crazy. The cow backed up about 30 feet, and it turned its tail and ran to the eastern end of the pasture. Suddenly, the whole entire herd of cattle split into 2 groups as if something was parting them right in the middle, and dozens ran west while the remainder ran east. His compass was pointing directly at this invisible force that was dividing the cattle up. It stayed there the entire time in that exact spot, whatever it was that was doing this. It was invisible in the midday sun, but obviously emitting a strong enough magnetic field that was detectable to his compass. And a day later, the NIDS team quartered the ground looking for any tracks that they could find. They couldn't find a dang thing, but they were overwhelmed by a strong musky odor that they could not identify the source of. Plus, they had multiple separate individuals there had the feeling like something was standing somewhere watching them that they couldn't see. So they both smelled something strong and musky, and then they felt like they were being watched by something. And that's the smell that Terry swears is associated with whatever goes on at the ranch, which, you know, we have talked, personally, you and I have kind of talked about how that strong, like, musky odor that you could describe as maybe a wet dog or maybe even rotting flesh is, like, associated with so many weird, unexplainable occurrences. It's...
Well, like I was telling you today about the Wendigo.
Yeah.
However you say it.
I think it's Wendigo, but I'm not positive.
Is it Wendigo? It's not Winnebago?
It's something that rhymes with something.
It's Winnebago. Yeah, same instance. There's some smell of rotting flesh, musty scent, mainly because they're wearing human skin, apparently,
right.
But...
Well, and just in a recent episode of Astonishing Legends, they were talking about the Black Monk of Pontefract, and that phenomenon was associated with a weird, musky odor. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? And that's not the first time I've heard that either. It's like, it happens with so many things. It makes it hard to believe that these aren't all associated in some way, you know?
Well,
and
everybody kind of has the same account going on here with very similar instances. So
in the following weeks after some of those instances that we just talked about, the Shermans came one morning to discuss with NIDS their findings, and they met in the center trailer, which is like kind of the control center. They said that one of the NIDS team members turned on a portable magnetic field detector just to kind of, I don't even know why he did it, but he was just flipping it on to check on it, I guess, and it started to go nuts, and it centered directly on Gwen. She left the trailer for a brief moment, and the detector went silent, and when she came back minutes later, the detector no longer registered any activity on her. So for some reason, for a brief moment, when she first got there, this magnetic field detector was going nuts, and they had done a control on the entire trailer to make sure that they knew what electronics and other appliances and equipment were going to give off a strong magnetic field, and the detector wasn't malfunctioning or anything like that, but for some reason, there was just another mysterious magnetic anomaly centered on Gwen that day, just like with the bullpen whenever it was magnetized and the compass. There's something weird going on with a magnetic field, but it's not ever like a standard, this is here in this spot always. It's just these random events. So what the heck? So the NIDS team, they started to use dogs as biosensors because the dogs showed a consistent pattern of picking up on activity and being alert to changes in environment before the investigators were.
It's similar to when people would take canaries and other birds down into caves and mines and whatnot to detect carbon monoxide. Human-made instruments often malfunction and can't be super reliable, but, you know, animals relying on instinct. The dogs are going to react no matter what. Yeah. Especially when it comes to, like, if this thing really is a predator, you know, the dogs can sense that. Yeah. Predator versus prey.
Right. They built these enclosures for the dogs that were 80 feet by 20 feet, and they were 15 feet high.
So these dogs aren't jumping over this fence.
No. It's that would be, I mean, I have seen some pretty impressive dog climbing up a chain link fence, but that would be far too high, and I feel like from 15 feet, wouldn't they break a leg or something maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
They had these wooden viewing platforms on both ends of the enclosures that would give the researchers about 20 to 25 foot vantage points, and like Shai was saying, time and time again, the doors would be opened, padlocks would vanish, and the dogs would escape by unknown means, and there was nothing that could explain it. There was nothing recorded on video, surveillance. They just could not explain it. There was even strong wiring that secured the inner doors of the enclosure, and that would vanish mysteriously. It was all done without the perpetrator leaving any tracks or signs of intrusion. It was just super mysterious and obviously undetectable to the human eye and video camera that is, I believe, not night vision. So it was just regular surveillance.
Well, and then if somebody was coming in and doing like bolt cutters or whatnot, like the dogs would have reacted, correct?
Right.
Because that's their purpose there anyway.
Yeah.
No reaction or fuss from the dogs.
They also said that the wires for these video cameras were encased in PVC and went into the spot in the ground, and that they had individually wrapped each wire, and also on top of that duct taped the wire to the PVC pole, so that you had to get through 2 casings of duct tape that were tightly wound and sitting in the pretty much summer sun all day. So, anybody that's ever done anything with duct tape, that would be such a tedious task.
Yeah.
And they unwrapped all of them. Like, there was a ton of it that they did. But yet again, they had cameras facing these wires and cameras. Like, all the cameras faced each other so that you would be able to see if anybody messed with them. And although they were able to see that the 3 cameras, there was 3 of them that had been destroyed, you could see that all the cameras stopped recording at 8:30 p.m. on this one night. You couldn't see anything else regarding what unwound all that duct tape and what pulled the wires out and destroyed everything. So, I mean, it's so weird.
I just want to say too, this is a lot of work, time, effort, money, for all this to be happening, for them to build these things, to acquire the dogs, the equipment, just the man hours alone. So it would be so strange to think that they're doing all this for just a stupid, like, wild goose chase.
Yeah. And also, who in the heck is the person or people that have enough time to be sitting around doing all of this bizarro, tedious stuff, all the time, constantly?
Well, and it's a live working ranch too. This is someone's livelihood.
Yeah. Which may be the reason why this is happening to begin with. We don't know. So, one investigator one evening had caught a eerie bright light on infrared film from a window in the old homestead, and he advised the other investigators to take a look at that spot a week later. He actually never saw the lights with his eyes, but he was able to pick it up on the infrared camera. So that's an interesting little tidbit to keep in mind. Kelleher and his investigative partner took the position at this old homestead, and they waited until all of a sudden one evening, a bright blue sphere of light about the size of a basketball appeared 75 yards to the left of them, and it was moving as if it was swaying gently. They both reported that they could no longer hear any wildlife or nature sounds, and it was eerily silent, as if a blanket had descended on the entire area. And then, all of a sudden, it was like someone flipped a switch, and the blue orb was gone completely. They scanned the pasture with a bright spotlight, but saw nothing until one of the men put on a pair of Generation 3 ITT night vision goggles, and he suddenly exclaimed, "There's a huge black thing in the trees just in front of us, and it's moving north." At that very moment, the dogs that they had with them began jamming themselves into the back of the men's legs and were fixing their gaze directly ahead where Kelleher's colleague was looking, and he was attempting to. His colleague said, "It's blocking out the stars." But without the advantage of the low-level ambient light of the night vision, Kelleher could see nothing with his eyes. His colleague said, "It's still moving." And then he said, "It's got me." He yelled it. He said, "It's saying we are watching you." Kelleher was and I was kind of confused by this, but let's continue.
Yeah.
Kelleher was attempting to catch this thing with longer and longer exposures with his camera, but could still see nothing. And his colleague was obviously shaken to the bone. When he finally said the thing was gone, Kelleher asked him what had happened. The guy was still shaken and said, "Something big was in the trees just in front of us. It blotted out all the stars and the binoculars. It took control of my mind. It told me it was watching us." He sounded confused and bewildered. Kelleher had worked with him closely on many occasions, and he knew that this guy was not prone to sudden flights of imagination, but his extensive academic career had not prepared him for anything like what he just experienced. So this guy he was, Kelleher was obviously like, are you sure what you're saying? Are you sure what really happened?
Yeah.
But this guy, he is not somebody that was typically prone to just make stuff up. He was very scientific about his research. They said he'd looked around many times and had never seen anything. But this night, he truly felt like this thing had gotten into his mind and was telling him that they were watching them. So, creepy as heck. I'm going to check myself out and say no thanks to that. So the NIDS team seemingly played cat and mouse games through July with multiple different lights that would appear, vanish, and appear again a good distance away. They felt as if something intelligent was leading them on a dance as they rushed silently from spot to spot, always managing to be just behind the fleeting orbs of light. Which I can imagine would be pretty dang frustrating, considering that you're sitting here, like, experiencing these things with your own two eyes or with your eyes and some night vision goggles, and you have no way of documenting it whatsoever. I cannot even imagine. And you're being told by the Scientific Advisory Board, like, you guys are doing nothing of worth here, like, you're not proving anything.
Yeah.
It's just got to be pretty frustrating. The most common UFOs that were seen on the ranch or near it were balls of light of various sizes, colors, and intensity. Is that what you saw too? Or is it just little light?
Well, when I saw, they looked like stars. They were the same size as stars, the same color, the same shape, but the way they were moving, it wouldn't even have been, I was thinking too, possibly a satellite, but are there ever clusters of like 5 satellites in one spot, and can they move that fast?
What kind of shape did it make? This is a side note, everybody, but
It was totally random.
Okay.
There wasn't, I can't remember, there was no specific pattern,
Okay.
Honestly. It was just so random.
Because we'll talk about, I think in a minute, we're going to talk about, well, I'll just get to it. So a few of these incidents with these light balls were captured on videotape. They actually did document those, but it's like, okay, you caught some bright orb flying around, like, okay. Amorphous balls of light are the most common report of UFOs worldwide. They are often a misidentified planet, meteor, or other natural phenomena, but you can't say that about all of them at all. As the Shermans learned in their time on the ranch, the natural phenomena excuse could not explain everything that has happened on the ranch. Oddballs of light, similar to what the Shermans reported, were first documented near the end of World War II. Allied pilots frequently documented and even photographed balls of light that trailed their planes. They thought that these might be German secret weapons, and these balls of light began to be known as Foo Fighters, which, there's the name of that band. I had no idea what that meant. The Germans also reported and documented these balls of light, though, and they thought that they were ours. So there's some weird bit of, history there. What in the heck was that? In the decades that followed, many secret military studies were conducted on these UFO mysteries. The once classified files detail cases from witnesses like one military pilot named G.F. Gorman, who, while flying an F-15 near Fargo, North Dakota, he encountered an intense white light about a foot in diameter that made dramatic turns and maneuvers during a 35-minute period before it completely disappeared with a burst of tremendous speed. There were several witnesses on the ground that witnessed this entire encounter. And here's what I was going to say. This kind of reminds me of yours. So in 1951 in Lubbock, Texas, there's so many more in Texas than I ever realized. Thousands of witnesses saw the formation of blue lights as they traversed the sky on several nights over a 2-week span.
I think there's been other instances like this where their lights have been in the sky in a specific formation, and they have stayed there for an extended period of time. People have it on their video cameras and phones and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, I have saved on my computer multiple photos of these lights in Lubbock because they were captured by tons of different people.
Yeah.
The military radar tracked the lights and determined that they were traveling at 900 miles per hour at an elevation of 13,000 feet. What the hell is that? So several photographs were taken of the lights, like I said, and that just seems, what in the heck is going to be traveling at 900 miles per hour other than some sort of rocket?
Well, so an average plane, so like a Boeing 747 has an average cruising speed of 550 miles per hour.
Which is
so
probably, as I think that's probably as fast as a terrestrial aircraft is going to get. In the summer of 1952, there were unidentified balls of light seen flying over Washington, D.C. on consecutive weekends. The lights were seen from the ground and the air, and they were detected on military and civilian radars, were photographed, and were repeatedly pursued by military jets. The explanation from the Air Force was that a sudden temperature inversion in the area prompted false radar sightings, which was a theory not supported by the facts surrounding the sightings and was openly disputed by the military's own radar operators and pilots. So it's like, okay, why are you trying to, I mean, I guess just to prevent mass hysteria that you don't, you just lie about it. Another often cited explanation for unidentified lights is that of plasma balls or ball lightning, which is a rare and little understood phenomenon known to generate small clouds of electrified air that could be mistaken for UFOs. I had never heard of these ball lightnings before, but there you go. You learn something new every day. So an atmospheric physicist, James McDonald, destroyed that theory with the simple reason that plasmas cannot do the things that UFOs do. Ball lightning generally lasts seconds or fractions of a second. It does not travel at high altitudes over long distances and cannot possibly account for the sightings in cloudless, storm-free skies. Another explanation cited for unidentified balls of light is Earth flights, which are electrical discharges in the atmosphere generated by geological forces in the Earth. Again.
So I was thinking about that because they have, I forgot what it is, but they have this mountain that over time and just documentation and folklore stories and whatnot, they say that balls of light travel down the mountain and they can't be explained. And so they chalked it up to these earth gases going off and traveling down the mountain because I guess there's like a lot of mines and whatnot. So, I mean, that would make sense, but it doesn't explain everything else going on.
Yeah, there's all these explanations. It's like, well, that could be in some of these cases, but then there's all these other aspects of them that really don't fit with that explanation. These Earth lights cannot account for sightings that were longer durations, where the UFOs perform controlled maneuvers or interact with observers, like when we had seen that blue sphere flying around and seemed to be like dipping down to kind of taunt the dogs when they were chasing it. You know, it just doesn't explain everything. So in government documents that were obtained via Freedom of Information Act, there was a sighting in 1975 at the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana of something in the sky that was large, round, and orange and hovering above the Minuteman missile silos. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really comforting. So a security violation alert was issued and an elite sabotage alert team was dispatched to the scene. The SAT members witnessed a large glowing orange disc floating over the top of the secret facility. They said it was so bright that it illuminated the missile silos below. Fighter jets were then scrambled in response, but the orange ball flew straight up until it disappeared from radar at 200,000 feet, which the fighter jets were obviously unable to follow it. A subsequent investigation revealed that launch codes of the missiles had been inexplicably changed during the disturbing overflight. Okay. Pentagon documents also acknowledge that 4 other nuclear missile bases along the U.S. and Canadian border had similar intrusions by mystery lights within a few weeks of the initial appearance at Malmstrom. So, what is that? So something came into the atmosphere, hovered over some nuclear missile silos, changed the launch codes, and flew off before they could do anything about it. That is pretty terrifying to me. Like, what in the world?
No, thank you.
Okay. I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know what to think about that. Oh, here is the single scariest and most freaking terrifying thing I have read about this entire Skinwalker Ranch situation, okay? Here we go, everyone. Brace yourselves for some scary. So on August 25th, 1997, the NIDS team was sitting silently on the edge of a bluff at the ranch, and the scene below was seemingly idyllic. Animals were grazing peacefully in the pastures, trees were full. 4 hours into the investigation, Jim, the most experienced investigator, decided to sit in the middle of the field to meditate. He had found that meditating often activated the phenomenon, and, you know, we heard that story about that hippie who busted onto the ranch and meditated, and then that predator-like thing came out at him.
I feel like, though, he kind of forcefully put himself in that situation.
Yeah.
He was kind of a, not instigator, but intruder, almost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why his experience was so vivid
Yeah.
and physical.
It's a good theory. So, nothing happened when this guy, Jim, meditated, at least initially. He began to think it was all just a worthless endeavor when he caught a faint light on the track 150 feet below them from the cliff. He thought it might be a reflection of ambient light on a piece of glass or something, but the light appeared to be growing steadily larger and brighter as he watched it. He set up a tripod and positioned a camera on the growing light, setting the timer at a 30-second exposure rate, thinking that a longer exposure may allow them to capture the light on the camera. His colleague, Mike, took out the night vision goggles and put them up to his eyes. Jim heard him sharply inhale. So at that same point, Jim noticed the light was now more than a foot wide, and it seemed to be hovering just above the ground rather than resting directly on it. Mike whispered beside him, "It's a tunnel, not just a light." Jim ignored his partner's growing agitation and set the exposure on his camera to 50 seconds because he still hadn't caught anything. Then Mike stood up and cried hoarsely, "Something's in the tunnel." Jim looked carefully at the light below, which had expanded to larger than 2 feet. "Oh my God," Mike said suddenly, sounding thoroughly frightened. "There is a black creature climbing out. I see his head." Jim felt alarm, and his colleague was bordering on panic. "It has no face," whispered Mike. "Oh my God, it just climbed out." Jim rubbed his eyes, but all he could see was the dirty yellow light that was now about 4 foot in diameter. Why couldn't he see what Mike was seeing? Suddenly, he realized it was the binoculars. He tried to get Mike to hand them to him, but he ignored him. "It's on the ground," he said. "Oh my God," it walked away. Mike danced on the ledge in a panicky state. Within 30 seconds, the light had diminished and pretty much disappeared. Jim pulled Mike over to him and asked him what happened again. He said, "A big black creature just crawled through that tunnel, got onto the ground, and walked away. That's what happened, and it's lurking around here somewhere." Jim got a chill. "I only saw that yellow light," he said doubtfully. "Are you sure?" "Jesus Christ, of course I'm sure," Mike responded. "The night vision turned the light into a 3D tunnel, and a large creature, I'm thinking maybe 400 pounds, at least 6 feet tall, just crawled out of the damn tunnel." Mike was sweating profusely and still breathing heavy, but seemed to be getting a hold of himself. The two men sat quiet, listening for any sounds that may indicate something was climbing up the cliff towards them, but they heard nothing. After 15 minutes, they grabbed some detectors and climbed down the cliff, stopping every few feet to listen for sounds of the creature. There were no sounds, but once they reached the track, they smelled a strong, pungent odor that assailed their nostrils. They were familiar with the sulfur-laden odor that seemed to center exactly over where the tunnel had been. Oh, really? They could not pick up any signs of radiation or unusual magnetic spikes or anything that they could actually document to explain any sort of anything about the situation. So after some time had passed and their confidence grew that a large creature wasn't going to come rushing at them in the middle of the night, they began to scan the area further with night vision equipment for anything out of the ordinary, and then began the half-hour walk back to the trailer. Back at the trailer, Mike described to Jim what he'd seen, which I'm going to read again, even though I'd already said 2 times. The bizarre and creepy sight of a huge black humanoid form using its elbows to lever itself along a 3D tunnel that appeared to be suspended a couple of feet above the track on which they later stood. Jim believed him, as he knew Mike had spent long hours in the darkness tracking the stuff and was not given to flights of fancy until that night. The team spent hours the following day searching for footprints on the ground, but there was nothing to be found. The ground was pretty hard. There was just nothing visible. The 2 men later worked on a written report of the incident, but their instruments failed to record anything unusual. The photos were disappointing, and they only showed a faint, blurry light in one photo and nothing at all on the rest of them. What in the heck was that dark humanoid creature that emerged out of a tunnel and walked away? And why are there always so many correlating details in these stories that are so crazy like this? You know, like this tunnel thing, that sounds like the one that Terry Sherman had seen, where that black creature had come out of, or actually when he saw it, it was a craft that came out.
Well, because they're not only happening in the ground, but we were talking about how in the sky too. like a portal would open up and there would be a separate sky. So it's like two different skies.
Right.
And the crafts would be coming out of that.
Yeah. What in the world, everyone? Please. I would love to hear, because I haven't heard one thing. I haven't heard one thing about what people may think this is. I want to know.
You know what's weird is I was thinking while reading all this and kind of thinking on it, apparently. I wonder how much influence this has as well as Montauk has on the show Stranger Things, because this is like super similar to Stranger Things as well.
Yeah.
I was like, is that creature a Demogorgon?
I know. I totally thought the same thing. I was like, this sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
And Montauk really, there are a lot of things on Montauk that, when we get into theories, there's even more that I'm like, what? There's too much. It's too much for me.
Well, in the show, they have the upside down world, which can only be seen when you're, in a trance? Or
some sort of. Yeah. You've been taken to a certain place.
So, like, looking through, like, the infrared infrared binoculars.
Yeah.
Maybe there are infrared lasers. I don't know. Which reminds me of a funny story when my friend and I did see those lights. It was kind of mean, but there was this kid in our class, of course, and he was super nerdy, super into science fiction, and we were talking to him about it, and he said, did they have ray guns? And I was like, yeah, Fred, totally. And he was like, were they ruby red lasers or the green ones? And I'm like, I don't know.
This isn't Star Wars, okay?
Yeah, I was like, never mind, Fred.
So although what this guy Mike saw emerge from the tunnel that evening was hairless, many sightings by the Shermans and others in the surrounding area reported a large, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature, or as he was known to indigenous peoples throughout the continent dating back to the 1700s, Sasquatch.
Damn Sasquatch.
So, good old Squatch. The Lakota Sioux of the Northern Plains refer to the Sasquatch as Chitonka, something like that, which translates roughly to big elder brother. It is said that the big man is a husband of the earth. He is a being that comes from ancient times who can take a hairy form or even change into a coyote. A Hunkpapa Lakota, I'm sorry about my pronunciations here, a Hunkpapa Lakota named Joe Flying By was quoted in a local paper as saying the following about these creatures. There is your big man standing there, ever waiting, ever present, like the coming of a new day. He is both in spirit and real being, but can also glide through the forest like a moose with big antlers if trees weren't there. I'm a little confused about that part, because I was like, does a moose glide?
No.
Glide through the forest if there weren't trees? I don't know. I mean, I guess what it's saying is it's a powerful force, maybe.
Honestly, I've heard that moose are quite clumsy and they don't have the greatest eyesight, because when you go moose hunting, you use wooden boat paddles to put up like you got moose antlers, and you go like this from side to side, and the moose can't tell. They just want to fight it.
Okay, well, that's either lost in translation, or he's saying that it's a powerful runner if it was running in an open field.
I could see that.
What did I just say? It can glide through the forest like a moose with big antlers if trees weren't there. So then it's like, okay, I don't know. So either way, slightly confused me, but at the same time, what I found interesting about that was he is both in spirit and real being, because that really does seem to be the case with a lot of the stuff that goes on at the ranch, at least for our tiny pea brains and our tiny eyes.
Our tiny pea brains, yes.
Well, right. What we can see with our eyes, it does seem like it's not there. But as we have just seen with that story, if you were to believe this researcher, Mike, that what he could see with his eyes wasn't the same as what he could see with these night vision goggles. So maybe there is something there that we just can't see with our pea brains.
So are you saying it's like an omnipresent type of creature?
Well, I mean, is it omnipresent if it's actually there?
I'll be honest, I just wanted to use a big word.
Okay. Okay, well, because I don't really know. I'm like, is it actually physically there, but we can't see it? Or is it an interdimensional thing? We will just get into that in a little while. But, as far as the legend of Sasquatch and how it relates to the situation, there's maybe some sort of, something. So, the Athabascan Indians of Alaska, I think, regard the Sasquatch as a big brother who looks out for indigenous Americans and brings signs or messages during troubled times. The Hopi elders believe that Sasquatch deliver messages from the Creator, often about man's disrespect for harmony and balance, which I'm like, I feel you there. In Native culture, the whole natural world is considered family. So Sasquatch are regarded as one of our closest relatives. In each tribal dialect, there is a word for the Sasquatch. And when white explorers and hunters and trappers first began exploring the Americas, they heard tales from the native tribes about large, hairy humanoids. And a few actually had their own encounters, which were generally written about in the frontier newspapers. So we'll talk about a few of these. In 1784, the London Times reported the capture of a huge man-like hair-covered creature in the Lake of the Woods, Manitoba. In 1811, a fur trader named David Thompson told a journalist about his sightings of a hairy giant near what is now Jasper, Alberta. And again, in 1840, a missionary named Elkanah Walker, who spent 9 years living among the Spokane Indians, described the tribe's belief in the existence of a race of giants which hunt and do all of their work by night, and leave behind a track about 1.5 feet long. The Butte Record of North California reported a sighting of a male gorilla or wild man in November of 1870, and these go on and on. In 1893, Teddy Roosevelt reported his own Sasquatch story in his book Wilderness Hunter. He told about a trapper he'd met named Bowman, who told of a deadly encounter with a tall beast that invaded a campsite in British Columbia, attacking and killing his hunting partner. And while it's definitely possible that some of these accounts are mistaken bear or other large animal attacks, they were all from experienced hunters who are intimately familiar with the sounds, behaviors, and physical features of bears and other species that inhabited the forests of that area. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like telling somebody that spends a great deal of their time learning about and tracking these animals, and then you're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. That was just a bear. Like, get a grip. Like, I don't think you can necessarily discount all of these accounts. Like, while some might not be legit, I think there's two. I mean, I didn't even include them all, and I just read a list of freaking, 10 different people, and there are so many. Like, it is just crazy. So here's another weird thing that happened. There were multiple separate documented sightings of an all-white, large, hairy creature with blue eyes and a pink complexion that walked with a limp on its right side. They were totally unrelated to each other, and each sighting included multiple witnesses. So a casting was made by one of the people who had seen this white, hairy creature, and the right foot was missing its big toe, which could be a really good explanation for why it was limping, considering that you can't balance without it. So what are the chances of 3 groups of multiple witnesses seeing this all-white creature that walked with a limp? They described it exactly the same, on the same foot each time. What's the chances of that? It seems unlikely to me, which maybe you're like, you just want to believe it, but I mean, come on. Like I say, every episode, some iteration of where there's smoke, there's fire, dude.
Where there's snacks, there's shy. Okay?
There are sightings of hairy ape-like men that have been recorded in 49 of 50 states in the United States and in every single Canadian province that there is. Early European writers recorded stories of the wild men of the woods that were seen in Germany, France, and other surrounding countries. Hairy ape men have been reported in China, Nepal, Russia, Ireland, Thailand, Vietnam, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, New Guinea, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, Kenya, and even more. I just named a bajillion places. It is known by the term Yeti in the Himalayas, or abominable snowman, as you may have seen on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And it does seem crazy to just say that every single person that has reported a sighting of this type of creature is just cuckoo bananas. A anthropologist named Helmut look at this guy's name, man. It's Helmut Lufswasowa is quoted as saying, to dismiss all of these sightings as a collective hallucination, the primitive need for the mythological or simply archetypal legends common to all of mankind will not do anymore. he has studied it extensively enough to think that we can't just dismiss these people who have experienced these things off the bat.
Well, you think about it, I mean, just think about how weird the creatures in the ocean are when we get past the layer that we can see,
Yeah.
naked with our own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And how just, what are they even here for? What's the purpose of this ugly, evil monster?
Mm-hmm.
Think about, spaces on the earth where we as humans can't really go easily. What could be lurking in the woods or jungle or whatever, especially, I mean, every region really.
Yeah.
So who really knows?
And, especially if this species has the ability to make itself camouflage by, or whatever else they do, so that, I mean, who knows? I know that some of you are like, oh, these girls have checked out, but I don't care. If that's how you feel, then, that's fine. Everybody has their own whatever. But I just feel like there's too much going on here for it to just be something that you can completely dismiss. So a common and popular theory for most people regarding what could be going on here is that it's a hoax.
This is a long hoax and
exactly
a very expensive, drawn out. It's like when they were saying that the Franklin cover-up was a hoax.
Yes, exactly.
How? Please tell me how these people all networked the same story, same everything.
Right. Without some sort of intelligence that we aren't privy to, or technology or something. How? This would have to be the most diligent bunch of hoaxers, and they are all over remote areas all over the world for a long, long time. Like, we're talking at least back to the 1700s, there's weird stuff going on and reportings of this stuff. There was this latent fingerprint expert named Jimmy Chilcutt, who was highly regarded by the FBI and the DEA. He entered the Bigfoot debate in order to debunk the numerous footprints that had been collected. And he said, while some of them were obviously fake, overall, the more he researched and examined, the more convinced he became that there was an unknown species out there that really does exist. And this is a guy who was literally coming in to debunk it. The more he learned, he was like, I can't say it is not something that we don't know. He's not just some crazy. So what if these things really aren't flesh and blood and are more of a paranormal nature? Like we said, that just means we don't know how to explain it with current scientific methods. Cases in Australia and America of poltergeist activity have very often been followed up by sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature. The same goes for cattle mutilations, strange lights, and UFO sightings. Back in 1975 in Boise, there were a number of sightings of hairy man-like beasts in people's yards, while at the same time there had been a wave of cattle mutilations and UFO sightings. Did you even know that?
I did not. It's kind of strange, Idaho. And like I said, I think it just seems to happen in more, there are those instances like I talked about, major cities, but the little consistent happenings seem to happen in more rural
right,
with whatever that areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So
one of the most often repeated claims associated with the Sasquatch sightings is this feeling of nameless dread, which we saw time and time again at the Sherman Ranch. Even aggressive hunting dogs cower and whine, which sounds real familiar to what was going on with the Sherman's dogs and also with the dogs that were there for the use, being the biosensors for the NIDS team. The 8-year program that NIDS undertook at the ranch used intensive surveillance, equipment, and PhD scientists and made the ranch arguably the most researched paranormal spot in history. Oh, and this was interesting because we kind of talked about it last week, how whenever Gwen saw that RV parked off in a little distance from the house and the man inside, that we thought maybe that was the man in black. So according to local lore, in 1970, the ranch was visited by a strange individual wearing a black suit and driving a brand new black Cadillac with extremely dark tinted windows, which that sounds like the men in black. And
yep.
They said that brand new caddies were like a rare sight in this area of Utah. So it wasn't just when you saw one, people noticed. And I want to look into that I want to look into that little thing a little bit more because I'm very curious. Because the whole Men in Black thing, which I think is more common. I mean, I didn't hear about it a lot with this one, but anyway, Men in Black thing is super interesting to me because it's definitely kind of reminiscent of a Skinwalker-y kind of thing where it resembles a human, but there's just something off about it.
Well, and the Men in Black sightings have been happening for a long time, and
yeah,
like I've stated previously, they're not. The movie Men in Black with Will Smith and Tiny Lee Jones. It doesn't really depict like what people report Men in Black actually are. It would be more of like the weird bug creature that they were trying to fight, which is something that resembles a human but can't quite get it right.
Yeah. The Vincent D'Onofrio character where he starts like deteriorating the more.
Yeah.
Which is actually quite similar to
the Skinwalkers.
Also a Men in Black encounter. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point. So it is extremely difficult to wrap the events of the ranch into one tidy little box as there are so many varying accounts on so many different sightings. And the big question is, did all this crazy activity on the ranch originate from one source, or is it like is the ranch a giant meeting place where multiple phenomena intersect completely unrelated to one another? I find that to be hard to believe, that they would all be completely unrelated. I just don't think I can personally say that because when you take into consideration the similar characteristics of these sightings and other sightings with other paranormal activity, to me, it's got to be related in some way.
You know what I just thought of, too?
What?
It's strange because when you read about, the Mothman prophecies,
yeah,
they always say before they see the Mothman, they always experience, some sort of feeling of dread or worry, anxiety, and the atmosphere kind of changes around them.
Yep.
And it's almost... Yeah.
The characteristics of the encounters are too similar, even if the encounters themselves vary wildly from, whatever different creature or craft or, but there's similar characteristics to all of them that make me wonder if it's all presenting itself as different things, but it's really boils down to one more common origination point or something. I don't know. So, like we said, a hoax just doesn't really, to me, a hoax does not really explain what happened. The Shermans didn't begin these stories, nor did they want any attention or monetary gain from eventually sharing them. They were tormented for over a year and thought that this ranch itself was a lifelong dream coming to fruition, only to move there and realize that they were pretty much under attack from the get-go. And while all the events that took place before Nids arrived are taken as fact on behalf of the Shermans, there were dozens of experiences that were actually the most disturbing ones that I felt and that the researchers felt were the most disturbing that were witnessed by the Nids scientists and researchers and not the Sherman family. Terry Sherman was almost entirely unable to let the ranch go completely without trying to find out what had tormented his family. And after all these years, the Shermans still do not grant any interviews. They do not want their new neighbors states away to know anything about the history at Skinwalker Ranch. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you think it's a hoax, get lost. I'm just kidding. Really, you can think it, but I just definitely don't agree. How you feel?
I don't think it's a hoax. I think there's something definitely inexplainable going on, and like I said, I don't think there's a lot of things that we can really wrap our minds around.
Yeah.
If it is, one of the theories is definitely our government is behind it, which I can see that. They're always doing something weird behind our backs. We don't really know. But why, though? Why just these areas? And why keep it going for so long?
Well, I started... Okay, let's listen to some of this stuff. So... Could the phenomena at the ranch be the result of military's newest ultra-secret technology? And I, like you had right now just said, I was kind of doubtful that this really could be explained too much by the military, but for the reason that just as one example, the Uinta Basin has been an outpost for the testing and deployment of advanced military technology since the inception of the military-industrial complex in the late 1940s, if this is simply a military experiment. That's a long time for this to be going on without anybody learning of it or anything like that, or them messing up and exposing themselves. Plus, like you said, what would their agenda be? To test on unwary individuals in isolated rural communities who would be less likely to cause a fuss about being experimented on, that is definitely possible. It would be a pretty ideal place in order to test people that don't know they're being tested. And also, like, this area, along with New Mexico, has a 40 to 50-year history of intensive, sustained anomalous activity involving up to thousands and thousands of people. But it's also, like we have talked about, it's not a wealthy area. It is pretty desolate, and the people that live there would likely not make a big fuss about this. So it's definitely possible.
Well, there's also, you have the government, and then you have the shadow government, which supposedly runs the government behind closed doors. So who knows about that?
Yeah, I mean,
it's just it's a rabbit hole.
And that's definitely getting kind of fringy there, but which is fine, because I don't know that I necessarily don't think it exists. But that said, if they were doing that on this ranch and to the people in this area, that would be illegal. And I'm not saying that would stop them in any way, because we've seen the history of what the government is willing to do on unsuspecting civilians, and if Montauk is to be believed, on unsuspecting military personnel as well. So, who knows? That said, an interesting aspect to this investigation is that NIDS invited remote viewers to come onto the property. And I didn't really know a lot about this, but while controversial, remote viewing has been investigated and developed in classified military and intelligence agency-sponsored programs for quite some time. Proper remote viewing is conducted according to structured scientific protocols. In essence, remote viewers are seemingly able to project their consciousness across space and time to access info that is unavailable by other means. The primary research for this protocol was done by physicist Hal Puthoff and funded by the CIA, and they were able to document results confirming that this was actually possible time and time again. After a report was released stating this technique was of no use in gathering data about foreign adversaries, the program was officially canceled. But since that report flew in the face of the hard data the program yielded over 3 decades, 30 years, many believe the research program is ongoing to this day, but under a much more secret operation, and I don't doubt it. While off the beaten path of normal research, NIDS had to keep an open mind and explore all options. So one remote why do I keep saying that? One remote viewer,
I don't know.
It's so weird. One remote viewer had no prior info on the ranch whatsoever. He was able to draw a nearly exact sketch and identified a spot on the southwest portion of the ranch as harboring an energy that was disturbing. A second remote viewer quickly honed in on the middle homestead as the center of what he described as weird energy vortices, which we have heard time and time again. They said that the center homestead, or the middle house, was the one that had the most centralized activity. Another prominent remote viewer, who was a retired military officer who was active in the CIA and Department of Defense research for remote viewing, was asked to provide an impression of the day the calf was so terribly mutilated. He said that he had a sense that a robotic drone had carried out the mutilation and that the drone might be of interdimensional origin. So I was like, oh my gosh, that means aliens. Mm-hmm. But then he added that the drone had some connection to the military. A fourth remote, and I'm not saying, again, I'll talk about this in a minute. I'm not saying this is fact. This is just something to think about. A fourth remote viewing exercise also suggested a military connection for the events at the ranch. They then conducted a group exercise with 5 different remote viewers from different areas, different places in the country. They were given a certain thing to focus on. It's how it works, but I'm not going into those details. But they were given a certain thing to focus on. They knew nothing about the ranch. They knew nothing about the history. When they all focused on this certain thing that they gave them, they all described a military operation, most likely involving the Navy. One said the Pentagon was involved. 2 of the remote viewers saw Navy ships. One saw an aircraft carrier, and they saw armed men in military uniforms, dark sunglasses, and Navy tattoos. 3 of the 5 perceived a large grid, net, or honeycomb made up of sophisticated electronic equipment and wires that had been embedded in the ground. One saw a humanoid with a long neck speaking a foreign language. Another saw sparkling lights in the sky and said that most activity was at night. They all came away from this remote viewing session with a sense of dread, nervousness, and darkness, and worst of all, death, which was consistent with the previous remote viewers that they had also done their research with. Now, I know this is like, what? And it's remote viewing, like, how do we know? I will say I didn't really know the legitimacy of this, but I didn't also know that there was 3 decades of confirmation in research and testing that had happened with this. Plus, this makes me wonder even more about Montauk. I'm like, oh my gosh, is he not a total loony bin? I mean, he's probably a loony bin. I think he's probably one. but
there's truth in whatever, like truth in craziness or chaos or something.
There's a little something going on here.
Right.
So, and as we recall from the last episode, I believe, or the one before that, the Shermans said that they heard heavy machinery under the ground at night, and it couldn't be explained by anything. And the previous owners had put that clause in their agreement, their real estate agreement, that they couldn't dig, which was freaking weird. So if you're trying to think about it coming from a more logical standpoint, then there's a portal in the ground, it would somewhat make sense. I mean, how humongous would this undertaking have to be? But it would make sense that there's something under the ground that they didn't want anyone to disrupt or damage or whatever. So who knows? But like that whole heavy machinery, the ground rumbling, things like that, maybe something freaking weird was going on under the ground. And I did also mention, I am full throttle right now, but I also did mention, I believe last episode at the beginning or something, where there was like that imprint in the ice, in that really thin ice, that they said you wouldn't have been able to go out onto the ice to even make that without breaking through. And it was thought that imprint was made from underground, but they didn't have any way to explain that. But it's just another interesting bit of information to kind of add to the underground weird theory. Obviously, remote viewers do not provide any solid evidence of any of their claims, but like I said, it's interesting. You can't completely discount it. There, I guess, are actual, studies done where this remote viewing was possible. So that said, the possibility of the military can't be completely ruled out, given their history, like I said, of their willingness to carry out psychological warfare, surveillance programs, and more against unwitting people. But that said, I think myself, I'm like an expert at this or anything, but NIDS is reasonably confident that military could not explain every single event that transpired at the ranch. So while maybe it does explain some of it, it can't explain it all. Then there's the delusions aspect. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the scientific community typically explains away these types of sightings as delusions of the witnesses. And so NIDS took this theory pretty seriously. They spent a lot of time examining the possible psychiatric explanations for the things that they had witnessed and that others had witnessed. They examined literature on fugue states, paraphrenia, which is like a psychosis that you could have all of a sudden and then for a short period of time and then for the rest of your life live like a totally normal, sane existence. It's very interesting. And also the interplay among hallucinations, psychopathology, and anomalous experiences. After a lot of research and interviews, they could not find a common thread pointing to an underlying psychopathology among various witnesses from all these different locations and different backgrounds. So that wasn't really for them a good explanation. So nature is another theory. Could there be an explanation that is a natural phenomenon here? The most commonly known theory of environmental variables affecting human perception leading the way to anomalous events is the tectonic strain theory, or TST. Researchers have published widely on alleged geographical and temporal relationships between mild tectonic or seismic stress and reports of anomalous aerial phenomena. TST says that electromagnetic energy released from seismic stress sometimes manifests as light, so-called earthquake lights, and also may interact with the human brain, perhaps as very low frequency or ultra low frequency radiation to cause hallucinations. Which is also kind of interesting because we know that frequencies can really affect our brains and perception. And some of these people that had experienced alien or UFOs and stuff actually had some slight radiation detected.
Oh, that's right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
But NIDS attempted to correlate the timing and locations of seismic activity using both the U.S. Geological Survey and the Utah University seismic databases in a 300-kilometer radius of the ranch over a 10-year period.
Lord.
Yeah, I know. With the events reported by both the Shermans and the NIDS investigators, and they found no such temporal or geographical correlations. So, they also examined other variables like the possibility of ingested hallucinogens, like Shai was saying, found no correlation with the local drinking water, and they said they only drank bottled water most of the time. They searched the property for plants that could contain psychoactive properties, and they could find none. They also had found no magnetic field anomalies on the ranch itself. So it's hard to explain it away with just natural phenomena altogether.
The only thing I could think, because you think back to when, what was it, the government doing like MK Ultra and all that stuff, and then there's instances where, you know, certain people were given doses of LSD without being told.
Right.
But I'm certainly not an avid LSD user, so I wouldn't know if people would have the same experiences or see the same things.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
So I wouldn't think that.
I think the only thing I've ever heard that happening with is DMT, that people seem to see a very similar thing when they do DMT, but I've never heard that about LSD.
Wouldn't that be something like the power of suggestion, though, really?
Well, I don't know, because I think in some cases it's like people that have never heard of anything of this before, though obviously any of this is definitely possible that it's in the back of someone's head, you know, and it manifests itself under this right conditions, I suppose, for sure.
Well, you know the movie Fire in the Sky?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, they were saying what had happened was a lot of those reports of what's her face, Betty and her husband something, their abduction stories were being aired on the TVs and whatnot, and that previous to that the main character's encounter, that he had been watching these episodes and whatnot, and that he went out into the woods and did a bunch of drugs.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a subconscious, you know, just plays these things out.
Well, it's possible, though. I'm trying to remember. I remember hearing or listening to something about that whole scenario, and they had some pretty compelling
arguments.
That's another, we can cover at some point. Another bizarro theory that I had never heard in my life, but I'm sure many of you have, is advanced terrestrial civilization, which is a theory that would have us believe that an isolated group of humans gained access to advanced technology at some point long ago and have controlled world human affairs for their own ends ever since. And to cover their activities, they engage in deceptive simulations to persuade people that benign extraterrestrials are visiting the Earth, which in my notes, I just wrote LOL.
Well,
I don't...
They say Tesla was getting information from extraterrestrials and aliens, and that's why he was so smart.
But these are humans that have a small group of humans that gained knowledge. Oh, I guess, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But he's, I don't know. I mean, good grief. I still am going to say LOL to that one. But extraterrestrials is another theory. So there are many various types of anomalous flying objects that are hard to pin down to the standard nuts and bolts metal aircraft that typical UFO stories might explain. The NIDS investigation yielded insufficient data on the flying object that they saw while at the ranch to support or eliminate the extraterrestrial theory. They couldn't really get any information on it. It is interesting to note, though, that all artifacts, pieces of metal, or other objects from purported anomalous origins have yielded uniformly terrestrial signatures after being subjected to metallurgical, chemical, physical, biological, or other analysis in nearly 60 years of research of UFOs to our knowledge. So unless the government just kept it secret, or whoever's, I just highly doubt, they got to whoever was doing the research on these pieces of metal or whatever, the objects that they found, they got to them and made them lie about it. Otherwise, it's all come back as being terrestrial. So it's not from outer space. And what does that mean? Does that mean that it's from the Earth, or does that mean that when it manifests itself in a physical form, it becomes of the Earth? Or what other bizarro theory can you come up with?
Well, if it is extraterrestrial beings, it brought up that they were imposing psychological warfare on the owners and inhabitants of the ranch and using scare tactics and quite
Yeah.
honestly some really scary stuff to drive them out or
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but and if it would and that's why I don't if I mean it wouldn't make sense for our government to do that sort of stuff
Yeah, I mean,
to scare these people.
I guess. I don't know. I really, because what, I don't know. Maybe they're conducting a freaking, like, century-long study on how to, I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know what it would really yield them, really. But, I mean, maybe there's something we don't know. I have no idea. I just don't know about the military. I'm like, I feel like some of it might be, maybe.
Yeah.
There's the Native American connection. We talked a lot about the history of the area and the stories that have been passed down from tribal elders in the last few episodes from indigenous tribes in the area. Most paranormal hotspots across the country have a strong connection to indigenous tribes, though, so that is something that you have to kind of see as a correlation between a lot of this phenomena. Who knows, though? They have their Skinwalker legends, but the Skinwalker was supposed to be an evil being that would have killed a human without pause. And the quote-unquote Skinwalker at the ranch seemed to kind of draw the line at killing animals and never once killed or really physically harmed any humans. And I don't think well, I mean, I guess you can say if there was that lake creature, that did do something to somebody. But in general, at the ranch, no humans were harmed. So it seemed to kind of really make a distinction between harming animals and harming humans. So that doesn't seem to align with the Skinwalker legend that is that a Skinwalker is evil as heck and is going to do whatever it wants. So one of my favorite theories that I feel like, in addition to maybe some government involvement, is the interdimensional other dimension theory. Could the phenomena at the ranch be interdimensional beings or time travelers that are access to our space-time continuum, or physical beings that are jumping across vast interstellar distances via wormholes? I know it sounds wackadoo, but there are theories by prominent physicists that are being presented at conferences and science journals attempting to relate current physics theories to observed anomalous phenomena. They describe the possibility that wormholes are shortcuts through the cosmic neighborhood, which circumvent the velocity of light limitation for interstellar travel. And according to some variations of the interdimensional hypothesis, the creatures or beings that access our physical reality do not need to necessarily be physical, but they still may be able and capable of influencing our physical reality and or mind control. There is something called a demonic reality, which is not to be confused with demonic. It actually means it's an alternate reality, not demonic. And a man named Patrick Harper wrote a book called Demonic Reality, where he describes that the creatures that were seen on the ranch as coming from this alternate reality, characterized by both physical and ghost-like attributes, that they're not inconsistent from his description of a crossover of beings and creatures from another dimension into ours. There's also a man named Jacques Vallée who has a similar hypothesis called the control system hypothesis, and we'll probably talk about more whenever we talk more about UFO stuff.
Well, I remember you saying at one point, the alternate reality and portals and whatnot. You were saying how some people theorize that we don't actually have ghosts. It's just like your alternate self in a different parallel universe.
Yeah.
There's completing an action. So it kind of like falls over into our reality. And that's why that book got pushed off the shelf, or we heard a thump or a voice or something,
Like Interstellar.
Which is like super interesting theories.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know I bring it up, and I like string theory will probably be a topic I want to cover that everyone's gonna be like boring, but that to me is like maybe there are other dimensions. Sometimes for some reason they cross over and we're able to see in, other things are able to get in. it seems like at the ranch, maybe this is like a hotbed of like where there's just the right circumstances that I don't really understand what they are, because science wasn't really able to explain it just by collecting data, but where it's just the right circumstances for these wormholes or whatever to open and these beings to be able to come out. And while we may not be able to see them all the time, they are there and they can come and go as they please. I don't really know. It's very bizarre for sure. I will say that like the people involved in a lot of this activity seem to be tormented almost by like a trickster like being, and it's hard to explain why that would be. You know, why would the government do that? Why would a alien do that? You know, what is the purpose of any of this? It's unfortunate that we really can't prove anything or explain anything with actual scientific explanations. They can't control the conditions on the ranch or around the area, so it's difficult to really collect any data. And there was that retired Army general named John Kelly who worked with the Department of Defense investigation at the ranch. He coined the term precognitive sentient intelligence, which he said it could predict what would happen next, and thus it was impossible for them to really get that much scientific evidence because it was always one step ahead of them. While that explanation itself isn't scientific, really, it's still, you know, it does seem to be pretty much the case here. Because, you know, we've been talking about this stuff for 3 episodes now, and there are so many weird things that happen that I guarantee most of you listening are going to just be like, well, that's just some crazy situation. That, you know, like, I'm glad y'all did a fictional, like, wackadoo
3-part episode.
But I am here to say that personally, I think something is going on here. I don't know if it can be explained in any way whatsoever, but I think it's a conglomeration of maybe some sort of interdimensional beings. Maybe there's also military involved because they have figured out some way to gain access to these things, but I don't really freaking know. And I also think it would be, when would they have been able to lay this like web of whatever beneath, you know, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I guess it's definitely possible that the government could have done some sort of giant operation where they, at some break between when somebody moved out of the ranch, they did this and then everybody came back. And I mean, I just can't imagine that would be, or they did it from the underground. I don't freaking know. I mean, this sounds like I'm a nut right now. So I know it's going to sound crazy. I know there are going to be people that say that NIDS is just bolstering claims to garner attention from whatever media or outside sources, but they didn't need that because this Bob Bigelow was rich. He was willing to fund them as much as they wanted. He wanted to be able to help this paranormal investigation as much as he could because he knew they weren't going to be getting funding anywhere else. But it didn't really matter when it came down to it, as, like I said a million times, gathering cold, hard data was too difficult. There really wasn't a lot to be found. And, you know, it's possible that the NIDS group should have taken a more laid-back approach, as Terry suggested. But like I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to walk the line between a laid-back approach and still being able to gather scientific evidence. So what happens at this ranch, I don't know. Our theories are, I mean, I'm going to say it's a combo effort of the government and like some sort of interdimensional portal that opens up our world to some, who knows.
Well, they say, you know, there's a lot of reports and theories about how the government, certain aspects of it and departments actually work with aliens and extraterrestrials together.
Right.
So who knows what's going on there? Little friendships and stuff.
I mean, who really knows? It definitely is impossible to say, but I'm going to just say that it's a mixture. With our current knowledge, I don't think that we'll ever know. So, well, unless they release some information, but it seems like the Freedom of Information Act is like becoming more and more useless because governments just start making everything private, and I feel like, what are we ever going to learn from anybody anymore?
Well, also too, though, it's kind of strange. There's so many like classified documents that are now declassified and you can easily look up on the internet. It's like, well, what constitutes them as not being important anymore to keep secret?
Right. I think a lot of that is like, there was that big moment a while back where they released a bunch of stuff that kind of showed that there was, when was that? It was in December of 2017, the New York Times broke the story that the Department of Justice had the active UFO identification program. They were there to evaluate the threat and study the technology and see if the activity posed a threat to the national security. They realized the technology was better than our own, and what the heck's going on there? I don't know. So I feel like they released some stuff that it makes it more sketchy to the general public if we don't tell them anything. So we just have to tell them like little bits and act like it's not a big deal. But yeah, so I apologize to any listener that wanted a like concrete, like this is what's going on here, but it's not happening.
Because we don't know.
Definitely not happening. But like, I think from the get-go, I think it's some sort of weird portal thing. I think the government thing, something's going on. Let's just hope that you and I and all of the rest of us are exempt from having any encounters with any of these portals and things crawling out of the portals. I don't want anything to do with it. Leave me the heck alone.
Just remember to wear your tinfoil hat.
Yeah, everybody needs a good old tinfoil hat. And speaking of that, we are going to hold a contest for the best tinfoil hat.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll post more about it, details on our Instagram and whatnot, so be on the lookout. But we're hosting a best tinfoil hat selfie, so
you're going to get a grab bag of goodies, of creepy little goodies. And yes. I really want you to, make an effort to make a cool tinfoil hat and not...
Yeah, get creative with it too. Do something cool.
Yeah, I want to see some real cool hats. Plus, I mean, it's not going to be for naught. You could always wear it for Halloween or something. So let's just get to work, everybody. Also, I would like to thank the Strength Battalion. I would like to thank Kelly. And I would like to thank Stormy for donating to our PayPal. You guys are awesome.
Awesome.
We love you, and we really appreciate that you believe in us enough to put that money in there. I think it's going to help us for sure to get some shirts rolled out for the holidays. So I know that there were like a number of people that wanted to be added to the shirt list for getting us a good idea about how many we may want to order on our first round. I've made a list. I am adding people to it. And I know some of you said like for Christmas, all you want is a shirt, a Creep It Real shirt. So it's coming. It's going to happen thanks to the generous people who have donated and are going to donate to our PayPal. And just to remind you about that little PayPal, it is just Creep It Real. We have a link on our Instagram and our Facebook. If you can't find it, let me know if you want to donate, but it should work great for you. And we can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Like we said, you're going to get some thank you cards here soonly. And then we'll set up our Patreon here soon as well. I say it every episode, but it's going to happen. You'll get some extra perks if you donate there, but for the time being, the PayPal, our Creep It Real PayPal is where you can donate.
Well, and it helps more than just shirts, though. Like we've had to buy a lot of books and documentaries and all that, and so it really does help go towards a lot of research too as well to the episodes.
Definitely. There's so many things. Like I think I said shirts this time because last time we didn't say anything about I don't think we said anything about that. But also it's like we would like to have a website where we could, have our merchandise and all sorts of things that it just takes a lot. So it really does make a huge difference to us if you guys just throw a couple bucks our way. We appreciate it immensely more than we can ever tell you here on this end of the podcast here. But so thank you 3 that donated so very much. We hope more of you will do so. Not to be badgers here, but it's very much appreciated. So anyway, thank you everybody also who has subscribed to the podcast, also who has left us reviews or ratings, and also the Bumble Butt podcast. You guys have been awesome and shouted us out a couple times, and we appreciate that big time. Yeah. You guys go check them out.
Those guys are pretty chill and down to earth too. They respond to every comment on their Instagram. They're pretty interactive with their fans as well. So
yeah. Also, everybody, if you could, remember that we want your stories that you tell us about whatever paranormal, out of the ordinary, unexplainable things that have happened to you. That is also going to get you on the last episode of the month, and the winner of the most creepiest story voted by listeners is going to also win a gift. So be sure to send your emails to creepitrealpod@gmail.com and tell us your tales. We've gotten a handful already, but we need more. So do that now.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, otherwise, I think we're good to go. That was a lot of Skinwalker Ranch for you guys, but we just couldn't fit it into anything less than 3 episodes. So we're going to continue to bring you the creepy tales for the rest of October. Don't forget to do all the cool things like visit our Facebook at Creep It Real. We got a Creep It Real podcast hangout group is what it's called. Join us over there and post it up.
We're moving onward to something different.
Yeah, we are. On a different topic. So, okay guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging with us. I hope you are getting scared in your own mind. Just for now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.